from the News Channel 5 Network. This is OpenLine.
Hello everyone, welcome to OpenLine. Glad you're with us tonight. And tonight we are taking a closer look at one of the proposed amendments that you'll be voting on Election Day, Amendment 1. So there are four that you can vote on, yes or no. It's a yes-no vote. And we're going to take a deep dive into Amendment 1 tonight. We have with us someone from a union. They're very opposed to this. I will attempt to read some of the things from those who support it, and there's certainly many who do. And so this will give you some indication of what this is all about. Happy to have with us Jason Freeman. He is a political consultant with SEIU, Local 205. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You've been on before?
Yeah, I was just say I'm a political director. I'm a staff person with the union.
Political director?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm going to change that right now. Political director. All right. So, Jason, before we get into the details of this, let's just talk about what it takes to change the Constitution. So we're going to be going to the polls on Election Day, voting yes or no on Amendment 1 and four others.
Yep.
What does it take to change the Constitution?
So there's a couple parts. The first is you have to propose an amendment in the legislature, and it has to pass both houses of the legislature twice in 2 consecutive legislative sessions. And the first time it needs a simple majority in both the House and the Senate, and the second time it needs a 2/3 majority. Passed very close, I think 1 vote of getting that 2/3 to get it out to the voters to be placed on the ballot. And then it'll be voted on. People can vote right now. Early voting's open, but on November 8th, when they tally the votes, in order to win, there's sort of a 2-part test. You have to get 50% plus 1 of all the votes cast on that amendment. So there has to be, if there's 100 votes, 51 votes for the yes side. And the yes total has to be equal to or greater than 50% plus 1 of the total votes cast for governor. So if a lot more people vote for governor than vote for the amendments, and they don't have a high enough number of yeses, then they could conceivably have more yeses than nos, but still not be able to put it in the Constitution if it doesn't meet that threshold.
Has that ever happened to your knowledge? I mean, that's an interesting sort of additional thing.
Yeah. I'm not a historian, so I don't know, but we could certainly look into it.
All right, what we're talking about is Amendment 1. The Yes Committee has launched. They say it's a right-to-work amendment.
Yep.
Right to work means Tennesseans cannot be forced to join a union and pay dues in order to keep their job, to get or keep their job. That's what those who are saying yes, and I'll read more from them later. What do you say about Amendment 1?
Sure. So Amendment 1, I would say, politely, is an attempt by corporations and politicians that they pay for to rig our Constitution the way that they have rigged our economy. And I could say a little bit about why, but just to address the language here of what it says, what it really says is that a union, a group of workers who have organized together to have a voice on the job, to fight for higher wages, benefits, and better safe working conditions, have to provide services to someone who doesn't pay for them. I can't go to the Chamber of Commerce and demand that they provide the services that they provide to their members, and they would not support that. But they do support a union having to provide services to people who don't pay for them. I kind of have an analogy that if you had a lottery pool at work and everyone put in, you got some people that say, I don't play the lottery. They're taking the risk that if you win the lottery pool, that everyone else is going to make a bunch of money and they're not going to be in. Well, if you called it a right to lottery state, they would actually have rights to the winnings, and that is how right to work functions. So if you are a person who work in a place where there is union representation, whether or not you're a member or pay dues, in a right to work state, you are entitled to legal representation of anything in that contract. You get the benefits, same benefits as everyone else, and you have access to their legal representation. In a free bargaining state, or a state that doesn't have a right to work law, you can be required to pay an agency fee, which simply is compensating for legal expenses, staff expenses, everything that goes into workers having a voice on the job. So it's more of a shared responsibility, and everyone gains the benefits. And so we think everyone should have a union, everyone should participate, because people in states that don't have right to work laws They make higher wages, as do most people that are in a unionized work environment. They have safer working conditions. And it ends up resulting when workers have power, unlike in Tennessee right now, we have an imbalance where corporations just have much more power. In states like that, you end up with things like underfunded schools because corporations don't pay taxes. For example, we know now that 60% of corporations in Tennessee are paying zero in the state corporate income tax. And that happens when you have an environment that's dominated by corporate power, when workers and families don't have enough power or don't have enough of a voice.
So right to work, that's the law now.
Yep.
And this would put it in the Constitution.
Yes. This has
been... The concern, I guess, is that there's going to be a federal law that's going to come and say that take away right to work. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what they're saying. I'll say it has been the law in Tennessee for 75 years, right? Since 1947, Tennessee is one of the original states to go right to work. The origins of right to work were really to exclude workers from union protections. It came out of following desegregation. There was a gentleman named Vance Muse who really was one of the early proponents of right to work. And his case was that white workers were this is an inaccurate quote, but he said something very vile, like white workers were going to have to share their workplace and be forced into a union with African apes, he described it, and said that they would have to call them brother or lose their job. And that's the origins of where this law comes from. Now, it's been the law for 75 years, and the question you're asking, why are they trying to put it in the Constitution now? I think the reason is that they see workers across the country standing up, having a voice, recognizing that they can take power and demand a better wage, better life, better safe working conditions, and they're really acting in the interests of corporations. The Yes campaign is chaired by the Chamber of Commerce, the National Federation of Independent Businesses. The two most prominent spokespeople are Governor Lee and former Governor Haslam, both of whom, before they were governor, were CEOs of major corporations. So I think it's pretty clear what we see. Working families are going to say no, and corporations are saying yes. So if you're not a corporation, probably vote no.
It's some pretty powerful support. There are commercials out there where you have former Governor Haslam sitting right beside current Governor Lee, and they're saying this is important. They're saying research shows right-to-work states like Tennessee have higher real income growth, higher employment growth, and higher population growth.
Yeah.
So again, they're saying, this is needed to continue these things.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
So I think there's a couple of key words in there when you say growth. So it's easy to grow when you have very low wages, right? You don't have to go very much to grow. And in Tennessee, both the Governor Lee and Governor Haslam, they like to tout their ability to attract businesses from other places, and they both do this the same way. They go to companies and they say, you should come to Tennessee because you don't have to pay Tennesseans very much. They advertise our state as a low-wage state. They are offering up Tennesseans as cheap labor to corporations, and then they're also giving them massive tax giveaways to get them to come here and not pay you very well. So I think when you look at the language, they're being a little bit tricky with it. Here's what I know. In a state like Minnesota, which is a state that's demographically not that different than Tennessee. I like to say their state goes vertical, ours goes horizontal, but about the same kind of demographic makeup. The average family in Minnesota makes $24,000 a year more than a family in Tennessee. And that's because about 10% more of their jobs are union, and they're not a right-to-work state.
And why would that, so why would that make such a difference? I mean, that's quite an interesting statistic. Mm-hmm. I'm sure the other side would push back, but why would that make such a difference? That much of is it because there are more people in a union? Is that what you're saying?
It's because there are more people in unions who have a voice on the job, and when the rising tide really does lift all boats. And so, good example, we have a lot of union members in Nashville, and they've recently won, support staff in Nashville public schools have been some of the lowest paid workers in public sector in Tennessee for a very, very long time. And this year we won $18 an hour, minimum wage. What that means is that somebody who works at a child care center can now go to their boss and say, the paraprofessional at my school just got $18 an hour. Why aren't I making $18 an hour? It gives you leverage in the workplace whether or not you are in a union or not. And so when you have 10% higher union jobs across a state, that's thousands of workers who now have power and are demanding better wages, benefits, and working conditions.
And again, what you're talking about here, this is already the law. What we're talking about would put it in the Constitution so that if there's a federal law, that it wouldn't change here in Tennessee. The real concern is there's going to be a federal law.
Well, it's not just a federal law. There is one sense there has been a federal law, the PRO Act, which we do support. We don't think there should be right-to-work laws. This law has been around since 1947. I think the results are that it is bad for working people. But it's not just the concern about the federal law that they're citing. Senator Brian Kelsey, who now under federal indictment for campaign finance violations, potentially campaign finance violations, and who's no longer a state senator, said that, you know, when confronted with the statistics that we have lower wages, that we have underfunded schools, that we have unsafe working conditions, he said if you think those things are bad, if you want to change those things, if you think right to work has not been good for Tennessee, then we need to put this in the Constitution so future legislators like you, he was speaking to Senator Sarah Kyle, can't change this law. So it's not just about the federal law. They want to tie the hands of future elected officials in case people get elected, in case as they're seeing workers exercising their voices, if they elect people who are more worker friendly, that will change these laws and improve people's lives. And that's why we say they're trying to rig the Constitution.
So this is OpenLine. So we're not time constrained here. I'm going to read the amendments.
Okay.
It is unlawful for any person, corporation, association, or this state or its political subdivisions to deny or attempt to deny employment to any person by reason of the person's membership in, affiliation with, resignation from, or refusal to join or affiliate with any labor union or employee organization. Okay, so they're saying you can't be fired if you refuse to join a labor union?
Yeah. So first of all, no one in the country is forced to join a union. And despite what the governor said today in a statement, no one would be forced to join a union if this amendment passes. In a state that is not right to work, if you work in a unionized workplace, you can be charged what's called an agency fee. And that is because those state governments have said, if you're in a unionized workplace, the National Labor Relations Act says that you are entitled to all the benefits and protections of the union contract. And it costs money to enforce those protections. That's why union members pay dues, so that they have representation, so they have staff like myself who advocate for better working conditions, people who do negotiations, lawyers who do arbitrations and disciplinary hearings to enforce your rights as an employee. And so in a non-right-to-work state or a free bargaining state, you can be charged an agency fee for the services that you are being provided. In a right-to-work state, they're saying you still get the benefits and you are legally obligated to get these benefits even if you don't pay. And so it's just fundamentally unfair. If you choose, like I said with the lottery analysis or analogy, if you don't buy the lottery ticket, you're not entitled to the winnings, right? But in a union environment, if you don't pay dues and you say, I don't need to pay dues, I don't need the union, I don't think it's important, but then you get in trouble and you're being under threat of firing, you can come back to the union and say, I want someone to come represent me in a disciplinary hearing, I want a lawyer to be at my arbitration, and you all have to pay for it. And so it's just a fundamental imbalance. And like I said, the idea is they want to pit workers against each other. They want to divide and conquer, and they want to make it weaker in the workplace. And really, this is about weakening worker power. You know, it pretty much comes down to that.
All right, we have several calls. So I want to go to the phones now. Let's go to Dane, who was the first to call in. Dane, hello.
How y'all doing tonight?
Doing fine. Go right ahead. What's on your mind?
Well, this is my question about it. I voted no. Okay. Why do we need to put such an amendment into the Constitution? You know, to me, it's just weakening workers. And you know, people like Mr. Haslam and Mr. Lee, both of those guys they got their money the old-fashioned way. They inherited it. And, you know, they can sit around, or CEOs can sit around and negotiate. They can negotiate their pay and their benefits. But you want to keep the guy on the hot factory floor from having any negotiating power. And look, these corporations they've got plenty of people fighting. They've got lawyers and accountants on top of each other that sit around every day and figure out how to screw working people. And you've got people up here in this state legislature right now. They're like a bull in a china shop up there. You look at what's happening with all this charter school stuff. That's just a backdoor resegregation is all that is. And they're up there running around doing all this stuff. You've got Rick Scott down there in Florida talking about abolishing Social Security when people have paid into that all their life, and they label that entitlement, which they're wrong for that, because that's an earned. Social Security and Medicare is an earned benefit. Okay.
Okay. Now you're getting way out there, but okay.
Well, I mean, it all ties together. It all ties together, Ben. It all ties together because the middle class is shrinking in this country. It's shrinking, and it's about time that somebody stood up for working people. That's all I got to say.
All right, Dane. All right, thank you. And again, so I think if the other side were here, and they're not, they would go back to this point. Research shows right-to-work states like Tennessee have higher income growth, higher employment growth, higher population growth. That it's good. It's for the greater good, I think, is what they would argue. But what do you think about what Dane said, and do you agree that they might come back with what I just said?
I think they would come back with that. Again, I just want to go back to growth is a key word there. So if you're making $7.25 an hour, which is the minimum wage in Tennessee, and your company increases you to $9 an hour, that is growth. But in a state like Illinois, where there is not right to work and large percentage of unionization, I think the minimum wage there is $15 an hour. So we might have a higher rate of growth, but we're not making more in terms of real dollars than in these other states. And I think that's the kind of misdirection that they're using. And I would just say the greater good. I mean, in Nashville, we've seen, this is a perfect example of how this plays out in real life, because a lot of this is language that is very confusing on purpose. But in real life, we've had a lot of development and construction in the city of Nashville. When I say you are twice as likely to die in the workplace in a right-to-work state, what I mean is since 2016 in Nashville, we've had almost 20 people die on construction sites. 20 human beings lost their lives building all this development that we've had in the city. Some of them on projects that got taxpayer subsidies. And that happens because it's not that we don't have the right safety standards, it's that the workers are not educated on how to enforce them, and they don't have union to be able to enforce them. Some of our construction sites do have union work happening, and they are safer for it. But that is, when we talk about the greater good, I don't think being twice as likely to die on the job is in the greater good. You said intentionally confusing. So I read it's not long, but I read it. Right. Do you think that's confusing? I think that it leaves out a lot of the context, right? It very much simply gives this legalese about it sounds appealing, but what it doesn't tell you is what are the impacts of it, right? And the impacts of these laws are lower wages, higher workplace deaths, underfunded schools, underfunded communities, right? That's what you end up with. Does it help us be a state that does not have an income tax? Again, the statewide business community is adamant right to work is one of the most important factors to our economic growth. It's fundamental to having a business climate in Tennessee that will promote economic prosperity and individual freedom. Well, I believe there's already a constitutional amendment. It's in the Constitution that there can't be an income tax. But I will reference what I said earlier. There's a report from the Economic Policy Institute that came out earlier this year that says 60% of corporations in Tennessee who file a tax return are paying zero in the state corporate income tax. That includes, I think, 25% of companies that report over $1 billion of income to the federal government. And they're saying they don't owe any taxes here. We don't know who these companies are. We don't know who pays and who doesn't, because there's a law that shields them from any public information requests about what they pay. That happens in a business-friendly climate where you have the interests of business put ahead of the interests of people, of our school system, of our communities. And so when you're looking for where investment comes from, I've had a lot of participation in the property tax conversation in Nashville. It's been a big source of debate. And the reason it's been a big source of debate is because it's the only major revenue option that we have outside of sales tax. Now, most people I talked to in Nashville said, why can't we tax downtown? Why can't we tax big corporations? Well, the answer is the state. The state legislators who are pushing this amendment are the same people preventing us from taxing big corporations. So it does all connect together, like Dane said. They're all sort of one thread.
All right, that kind of sets the table. We have several people on the line. Robert, Charles, Larry. Hold on. We'll get to your call. If you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. We'll be back right after this.